I remember when my oldest daughter was probably 11 or 12, about the same time that my older sister started babysitting and actually getting paid for it. But we weren't paying my older daughter, but we would leave her sometime with the younger three kids, and we would, go run errands or something, maybe gone for an hour and no more than 2 or 3 miles from home. But we would leave the kids at home rather than packing them all up and traipsing them through the Costco or the Sam's or whatever. And I remember coming home one particular time to find my then, I guess he would have been about 6-year-old son with his hair cut in a really funky fashion and pink and blue streaks in his hair. Now, we ran a kids event every Saturday night, and so we had a game box that had all kinds of stuff in it, like hair paint and face paint and toys for specific games like relay races and Fear Factor and weird stuff like that. But that's not what she used in his hair. She actually, his older sister, who was about 7 or 8, used pink sparkly and pink and blue sparkly fingernail polish. And she cut his hair, think Cyndi Lauper back in the day when there were little squares and then a spike came out of the square all over her head. Yeah, she kind of did that to her brother's hair. Fingernail polish all the way to the scalp. Fingernail polish through the hair, stiff as a board. She said he wanted to be a punk rocker. Well, he will be for a long time because that's not washing out. And we tried a little fingernail polish remover and tried to keep that off the scalp and out of the eyes and get it out of the hair. And in the end, we ended up shaving his head. I mean, completely shaving his head at 6. He still, though, had pink and blue fingernail polish on his scalp for several weeks. What happens when you're left unsupervised? Now, I know we think of that as adults, and we think, well, we're adults. I mean, we're grown people. We don't do that, right? We're not going to paint someone's hair. I don't know. Have you seen some of the movies out lately about the kinds of things that happen when the boss is away? Or there was a Christmas holiday party thing about the boss lady came in and canceled everybody's bonuses and said to lay off a bunch of people, and they had a party instead because they thought she was on her way to the airport and leaving. It happens all the time, unsupervised. Here's really my question for you. If we find ourselves, whether 5, 6, 7, or 8, or grown adults, behaving in such a way that would be unseemly, for lack of a better word, that would be inappropriate, that would be unproductive, killing time, doing nothing any good, when there's not someone looking over our shoulder, making sure that we're doing exactly what we're supposed to be doing. How do we get to that place where irresponsibility is easier than taking responsibility for what we're supposed to do? How do we get to the place where we can allow ourselves or permit ourselves or feel okay with not doing the right thing? Well, part of it is a questionable integrity. The other part of it is maybe we've just never been trained what it means to truly be supervised, what it means to follow instructions that you're given and be held accountable for them. See, one of the things that I've always tried to observe with my kids, and as my children are no longer children, they're all adults now. My youngest one being 18, 18 and a half now. This month is 18 and a half. And I have to look at it and say, there are a lot of decisions that are standing in front of him that he might make that I would rather he didn't. A lot of choices that are his choices that come with significant consequences. And it's really hard when you're 18 and a half to look 10 years down the road or 5 years down the road, or sometimes 10 feet down the road. To make an emotional, immediate decision, it's the natural course. And it really is. And it's not just about my kid, it's about any kid in that probably 17 to 22 or 23 range. Again, we go back to that whole neuroscientific fact that the prefrontal cortex that understands what long-term consequences are isn't quite fully developed yet, not till 25. And so there's a range of our lives where we're fearless and we're willing to make major decisions with minor input. We're willing to make major decisions with very little fact behind the decision that we're making. In fact, we tend to make those on emotion. We tend to make those decisions quickly based on what we think is going to be the outcome without even taking a lot of time to research the facts. It's human nature. It's kind of what we expect of 17 to 25-year-olds. Unsupervised, though, with no input, with no one to say, you know, I understand how you came to that conclusion, but I really think you should consider these other things. With no outside input, left to our own, we could probably destroy the race in a short order if every decision that we made in our lives was made between 17 and 25 with no other input. And look at the kinds of things that happen in our lives in that age range. I remember I was fresh out of the Air Force. I had met some people that I thought were pretty powerful and pretty influential, and I had a chance to sit down with a lady by the name of Judge Cynthia Kent. This was in Tyler, Texas, many, many years ago. From what I understand, she's still a judge and her husband's still an attorney, but at the time they were heavily involved in conservative politics in that arena, and I met them through some church circles and other people. And I remember sitting down with her in her office, not her judge's quarters, but her regular office at the courthouse. And she said, you know, I find you to be a very bright man. I think you have an impeccable opportunity in front of you. Opportunity is the key word. You have a chance to do some incredible things. You're very bright, you're very compassionate, you have a big heart and a great mind. But I'm also going to tell you, you're at the age in life, and at the time I was not quite 25, but really close. She said, you're at the age in life where life could go either way from right now. You could go back to school while you have your GI Bill and focus on law or politics or psychology or religion, whatever it is that you want to focus on, and work your way between now and the time that you turn 30 through your degrees and your advanced degrees. And then have a different earning power when it comes to raising a family and doing what you really want to do with life. But you're also the kind of guy that if you don't go that path right now, it won't be long before you'll be married. You'll be married into a family that demands your time, demands your attention, wants your finances, wants your support right away. And as you move down that track, the amount of time that you have, the amount of resources that you have to go back to college are going to be very, very limited very, very quickly. And I can't say that one is right or wrong for you and the other is right or wrong for you, but I can say this is a gigantic decision that only you can make, and you need to make it now. Because the time to make that decision is very brief. That window of opportunity is going to pass. And you'll either find yourself deeply involved, applying your mind and your heart into an education course, or you're going to find yourself deeply involved, applying your mind and your heart into raising a family. And I think that Y in the road is coming very soon for you. And I thought to myself, I really don't like school. Maybe I'll wait another couple of years. And 2 months later, I met the woman who has now been my wife for 23 years. And we've raised 4 kids. And this month we'll have our 7th grandchild. And I never did go back to college. Now, that doesn't mean I'm not a student. I study constantly, as you can see by the books behind me. I've read probably 85% of every book on that shelf. I've read 100% of the book, but about 85% of the ones on the shelf. I love to study. I love to learn. If I had a complete day to myself where nobody bothered me, that's what I would be doing. I would be reading, because that's what I love to do. But the reality is, I had the chance when someone spoke into me at that age to say, I've got to make a huge decision. Now, I won't look back on the 23 years since the day that I married my wife, or the 24 and a half since I met her, and say I made a mistake. I will say, if I could have put it on pause and come into the marriage with my master's degree or my doctorate's degree, my life position may be a little bit different. I don't know. But I do know that when I look at young people today who are making what I feel are potentially rash decisions, and they're everywhere. I spoke to a young man not too long ago that talked about having a child on the way, and the phrase he kept using was his girlfriend. Not his wife, his girlfriend. Now, I'm a firm believer in marriage because I know that the word marriage means commitment. It's a covenant. And what it says to a child is, those two people who brought me into this world are absolutely committed against all odds to each other, and that I'm going to have a stable family to grow up in. I will always have both of their input in my life. The two people who love me more than anything on this earth, those two people are going to be pouring into my life until they no longer can. And I'm a firm believer that marriage should be for a lifetime, and I understand that it isn't always so. There have been many divorces in my family, on my side, on my wife's side, and sometimes that's the only way. Sometimes divorce is the only way to avoid a dangerous home environment or an unfaithful partner. But I also believe that when a marriage is worth fighting for, the children benefit in that stable home. What happens when young adults become parents and they're unsupervised? The parents are unsupervised. What happens when those young adults have no one speaking into their life, no one giving them direction? What kind of parents will they be? Well, like many of us, they'll probably just have to figure it out as they go and then look back 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years later and go, wow, I could have done that better. I wish I'd known X. Who's speaking into the teen unwed fathers in your life? Who's speaking into the teen unwed mothers around you? Do you know of any program in your school that speaks to fatherhood or father values or leadership skills for teen unwed fathers or mothers? Or have we left a generation to be unsupervised? Or at least parts of a generation that will be raising kids with no parental involvement, with parents who have missed the boat somehow. Will we leave them to figure it out on their own and hope for the best? Or do we stay as close by them as we possibly can and give the advice that we know comes from our own life experiences? Now, here's one caveat to that, which I find challenging, and I live it myself, and it's a tough one. And that is that all of my children, being young adults right now, are fully responsible for the decisions that they make. Before God and before a court of law, before a judge, in front of a law enforcement officer. If my son gets pulled over for driving like an idiot, they don't call me and go, hey, Dad, you need to come out here and discipline your son. He's an adult now. The law will take its course from there. The consequences are fully his to pay and not mine. Which means I can influence a decision, but I can't make it for him. When we raise young people to always be children, they will never reach the place where they can make good decisions on their own. When we raise young people who are not adult in their nature, they just make decisions as they wish without regard for consequences around and without that feedback, because they've never been allowed to consequence. They've never had the opportunity to go, wow, I really messed that up, and that price is a heavy price to pay. When we coddle them too much, becoming adults, they live unsupervised because they've never suffered consequences. And that's a very fine balance. To press in to that relationship as a dad and say, here's what I think you should do based on my experiences. This is my advice based on my experiences. This is what I've been through. This is the consequence. These are the friends that I hung out with, and this is what happened when I did. These are the decisions that I made, and this is the price I had to pay. And I'm telling you, if you'll avoid those things, you won't have those consequences, and you won't have to pay that price. But ultimately, I can't make the decision for you. I can give you all of the facts that you wouldn't have thought about. It's kind of like when you go to buy a used car. Ever bought a used car and come home with a lemon? Bought a used car and come home with a piece of junk? And it's only a matter of weeks or days and you realize you're not going to get your money back. You got a broke car and you're all out of money as well. How could you have prevented that? Well, there are signs and symptoms that a good mechanic would know. The average car buyer doesn't. That's what Carfax is for to begin with. But Carfax even doesn't have all the facts. A good mechanic checkout from an objective third party, someone who has nothing to gain by the buy or the sell, pay the $85. Let them run a full diagnostic on that car. Let them tell you if it's low on Freon or the compressor has a leak, because their diagnostics can tell you that. Let them check out that engine for knocks and pings, that transmission for slipping and for time. Let them check those things out. It's worth the $85 before you put your license plate on that car. See, this mechanic, he has no win, no lose, nothing to gain by you buying a great car or a piece of crap. It's irrelevant to him. But his insight is priceless. For young adults who are parenting, for young adults who are trying to decide about college or staying in school or moving on to the next thing in life, there are a lot of adults who have lived through those same experiences and said, wow, if I had a chance to do it over again, I would not have done it like that. To live unsupervised is a choice. Whether you're 20, 15, 40, 50, it's a choice to say, I've got this all figured out. I don't need anybody's help. Talk to the hand. It's a choice to say, can I get a little insight on this? I may or may not take your advice, but I'd love to hear it. I really want to know what you think about this. And I may disagree with your opinion altogether. I might not even come to the same conclusion that you've come to. Ultimately, I may not do what you advise me to do. But I'll be wiser for having asked. I'll have a better understanding because I took the time to listen to someone who has been there before. You might remember just a few days ago, we talked about everyone needs a mentor. Yes, you need a mentor. I don't care who you are or at what level. There's someone a further step down the road. Someone who understands something you have not yet mastered. Someone who has been there. Someone who has studied this stuff. Who's willing to answer the questions. That's a tough challenge when you're a grown-up with a real full-time job and a real life to sit back and go, someone probably knows this better than me, and I'm going to ask. None of us have all the answers. There's only one who does. Ultimately, that should be your best mentor. I was listening to a story yesterday about a guy who had been a big-time celebrity in public speaking and in church for a long time, and his daughter called him and said, I'm done, Dad. I can't do this anymore. And she told him all the pills that she had taken, and she was driving down the highway in the dark. And she had taken enough pills to end her life. And when she called him, she just said, I want to tell you I love you, and I'm sorry, and goodbye. Well, like any responsible dad, he jumped in his car and he went to the last place that he knew her to be, and he started driving up and down that highway looking for her. In the pitch black. No lights on the highway. No way he could see more than 2 feet off the edge of the highway in any direction. The cliffs and the beach on one side, the mountains on the other side. He's driving along with little hope to find her. And he just said a little prayer. He said, God, point me in the right direction. Show me where she is. He said in that moment, it was like some invisible hand grabbed his chin and said, look right there. And instantly he saw her car off in the woods. He made a U-turn and pulled up, and he got there with probably minutes before her life would expire. He got her to the hospital, and they were able to pump her stomach and bring her back to a restored health. After she got out of the hospital, she was at home, and he started talking to her, talking about the quality of life and making good decisions. And she said, Dad, I don't need you preaching to me. I don't want to hear it. This whole church thing and Jesus thing, it's not for me. And he let it go. He gave her space. He also said a few weeks later he was driving in her car, taking it to get some maintenance of some sort, thinking about the confrontation that he had had and how he could have done things differently. He said as his mind was racing, he wasn't really paying attention to much going on around him except where he had to go, and he stopped at a light and then heard a familiar sound. And he looked down at the radio, and the radio in his daughter's car was on Christian music. This whole time, she'd been listening to worship music. He thought the argument was over. He thought his advice had been washed away. He felt like he had made no impact, that his influence was done. But God. See, we all tend to live our lives unsupervised in one aspect or another. Maybe we don't have a mentor. Maybe we like these teen fathers who have no father input. I can't tell you how many times I ask a young man who knows that his girlfriend, fiance, or wife is expecting, so tell me about your dad. It's one of my favorite questions to ask. So tell me about your dad. And I can't tell you how many grown men, teenage men, soon-to-be fathers have to fight a tear to answer the question, so tell me about your dad. Because they've been unsupervised. I want you to know, it doesn't matter if you're 15, 25, 35, 45, or 75. He's a good father. And he doesn't leave you unsupervised. He does wait for you to ask for advice. But unlike me, there are things that I don't know. And there are things that I know that I don't know. And there are things that when you call me and you ask me, I'm going to tell you I don't know. Our Father in heaven doesn't have that problem. If you want to be supervised by someone who does have every answer, every time, there's only one Father who does. And Father knows best. We don't have to live our lives unsupervised. It's a choice. We don't have to live our lives asking the question, how am I going to get through this? What do I do in this case? Well, what about now? How do I pay the bills? Do I go to school? We simply need to ask. But in the same way that it's challenging to walk up to some random stranger on the street and go, hey, what would you do about this situation? Without a relationship, it's really hard to say, Father, help me with this, without a relationship. Gotta have that relationship. But he's just waiting on you for that as well. If supervision is important to you, if having guidance to answer your questions, if having a mentor in your life is important to you, then I would start with him. The best advice you're ever going to get comes from him. The most immediate answer you're ever going to get comes from him. The right answer comes from him. The most insightful, long-range planning, understanding of consequences, willingness to pay the price with you and for you comes from him. None of us can do this life on our own. It's important that we surround ourselves with family and with friends. But when we reach the point where all of our family and all of our friends just don't know the answer, he does. Take a minute and ask him. And if you don't have a relationship with him and you'd like to have more information about that, send me a private message and I will call you or text you or message you until you have the answers that you need. I'd be delighted to make the introduction for you. You don't have all the answers. I don't have all the answers. And all the answers that could be had, we may not know them in this life. But he does. He knows every one of them. And when we learn to know and love him, then we will learn to know and trust him. And trust that what he does is ultimately good, because he is a good, good father. And there is no reason to live this life unsupervised. I am J Loren Norris, and you've been watching Tell It Like It Is TV. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, whether you're on Facebook or YouTube, wherever it is that you like to watch. Remind your friends and family that they can subscribe on iTunes Podcast as well. This is a daily video on iTunes Podcast. And TellItLikeItIs.tv is a growing place. So if you are a content provider and you would like to collaborate, we have a channel being built right now on YouTube, and it will be shared onto the Tell It Like It Is platform. So you'll have a chance to build revenue of your own through your own advertising value, but you'll also have a platform where like-minded people can come to find the content that you provide. I hope that you'll be a part of that. I'm glad you're here. I appreciate you being a part of this, and I appreciate having the opportunity to be a part of your day. God bless.